Earlier in this newscast, we told you the State Board of Education had passed emergency rules to implement House Bill 1775. With more on what that means and what is actually in or not in the new law, Moderator Susan Cadot welcomes two legislators who debated the merits of the bill on the House floor prior to its passage to find out what they think the new law means for teachers, parents, and students going forward.
Thank you, Rich. Yes, we have two voices in this matter joining us today for an in-depth discussion. And joining us is Republican Representative Kevin West, who is from Oklahoma City, and Democratic Representative Regina Goodwin, who is from Tulsa. Thank you both for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
All right, Representative West, I want to start with you to get the latest on, it was House Bill 1775. What is the status now? What happened?
On this past Monday, the state education board passed rules to implement this because two things that are in the bill. One, that none of this bill will contradict the Oklahoma academic standards. And then the second part was that the State Department of Education would make the rules to implement and enforce this. So on Monday, they passed the rules to do that. So now those rules will go down to the individual school districts, and there's a few slight things that each individual school district can do to work within that framework. But for the most part, the rules that the state board passed will be what govern for this school year.
First of all, they put an emergency on something that's imaginary. It's a waste of taxpayer dollars. Again, as he said, no one is teaching this in the curriculum in terms of the Oklahoma academic standards. Title 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 of federal law already covered the fact that you cannot discriminate, the fact that you're not going to teach anybody that one race is superior to another. We already know that. So let's understand it was a totally baseless law. It's wrong. And this whole idea about he's getting comments from certain folks, the bottom line is it had nothing to do with Oklahoma academic standards, nothing at all. Again, what the state superintendent has now been forced to do because they put an emergency on it is come up with these punitive consequences, which are ridiculous. Again, he has not been able to ask the question, how do you legislate feelings? Sounds like a bunch of lawsuits coming to me. It's poorly written, you can't understand it. The bottom line is this. Republicans, by and large, are going to benefit from this divisiveness. Republicans, by and large, are very smart and they know racism exists. The consequences of racism exist. And good folks all across Oklahoma should know we've got to continue to educate our children in the proper way. And that means talking about the uncomfortable history that talks about racism and the present day consequences of that. The bottom line is racism is embedded in the fabric of America and the fabric of Oklahoma. Let's deal with it. Let's move on. Let's become better people. This law does not help us do that.
Representative West, you are a co-sponsor of this measure. What does 1775 do?
House Bill 1775 addresses two concerns that were brought to our attention in the legislature. First, on the higher ed side, it addresses the mandatory gender and sexual diversity training that many of the schools are doing. And then the main part of the bill, which is what's gotten most of the attention, is it bans certain concepts. We listed 8 specific concepts that we did not want to be taught in school. At its heart,
when you say school, do you mean higher ed?
In Common Ed.
Common Ed, okay.
The mandatory sexual and gender diversity, that's on the higher ed side. And then in Common Ed, it deals with these 8 specific concepts. And really, in my opinion, at its core, House Bill 1775 is an anti-discrimination bill. And so basically what we did, I say we, me and the other authors of the bill had gotten reports from parents that many of these 8 concepts were being taught in Oklahoma schools. And once we started digging into it, we found that all 8 have been reported as being taught somewhere in the United States. So we figured we would go ahead and address them because if it's being done somewhere else, it's just a matter of time before it comes here.
Representative Goodwin, what is your interpretation of this measure?
Well, first of all, if on its face, as it reads, as Representative West has said, he's got some language there. First of all, as he knows, these concepts are not being taught in any curriculum, in any classroom, in any course in Oklahoma. I asked him that on the House floor. He wasn't able to show me where that was. And to date, no one has been able to produce that. So that is not really what's at issue here. And I think Representative West, if he knows today where this curriculum is being taught, he can share that with us today. So it is a fake problem with a fake solution. And anybody that wants to put this under the cloak of its anti-discrimination, how do you legislate a feeling? And I'd like him to address point 7 and 8, the language in his own bill, and what does that mean? How can you, it says a teacher cannot teach to make a student discomforted by the fact of their own race. Who's doing that? And what does that mean? And that's what I'd like to ask as he's described in this law.
Representative West, would you care to respond?
Sure. Point number 7 says, I'm going to look down and read, that any individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his or her race or sex. And what that means is that you don't go into that assignment with to get that reaction from certain students. When you're presented with, the fact that we had slavery here in America, we fought a war to end it. We've had racial tensions. There's been the Trail of Tears, many things in our history. When you're presented with those, every individual will feel something about that, and that is perfectly fine. And it's perfectly fine to have those discussions. What we're addressing with these is that we're not going into it to get certain students to feel a certain way.
How does it happen though? Because the events that you just mentioned, the tragic events that you just mentioned in America's history, make all of us feel horrible, or they should. I pray they do. So how do you keep, what is it about the measure that, is it specifically aimed at keeping white students from feeling badly about being white? And I felt bad when I learned these things, but not because I'm white, because I was a human being. So does it specifically address white guilt, white shame?
No, it does not specifically address that, although that is a part of it, because some of what is being taught is to make white kids feel like they should feel these certain ways. In fact, one of the school board members in my area, right after the bill was signed, actually said that, that the white kids should feel guilt for the things that happened in the past. And that's exactly what we're trying to prevent. And if you teach the standards, then everything's going to be great.
Representative Goodwin, you mentioned Articles 7 and 8 of this measure, that the desire to not make anyone uncomfortable. Would you argue that folks should be uncomfortable with some things?
I would argue that you cannot legislate feelings. You cannot legislate emotion. It's a stupid line. It's poorly written. And I mean that with all sincerity. It's poorly written. And again, you cannot enact an emotion. And Representative West knows this. So the trick of all of this is to have us discussing this distraction. The trick of it all is to have us trying to make sense of nonsense. Representative West knows you cannot legislate emotions. People are going to feel different ways about different things. We cannot determine how a child is affected. I know how I felt when I saw Black folks with collars around their necks in slavery. I was discomforted, but I learned that's a part of our accurate history. And I learned out of that discomfort that we can be better as Americans.
Oklahoma has gotten a lot of attention nationwide, and it's for this measure, right? Representative West, is this the measure that they're referring to when they're talking about Oklahoma banning the teaching of critical race theory in state schools, even though this measure never mentions critical race theory?
Yeah, the state of Idaho was the first state to pass this. Several states have taken this measure up to in some form or fashion. I've been in contact with many representatives from other states that are looking at doing this because they're hearing the same thing that I was hearing and that many of the other co-authors were hearing, that this is in fact happening, that, in elementary school, they're having kids take a white privilege test and determining who's the most privileged in the class or the least privileged.
This is in Idaho?
Here in Oklahoma, Idaho, many other states.
So where would that be? Where was that happening?
Well, here in Oklahoma, it was there was a curriculum in Edmond that was doing that. I've gotten a lot of contact from people in the Norman area and many other school districts here in the state. I would not say that it's widespread throughout the state, but when you have several of your larger school districts that are engaging in this, and to Representative Goodwin's point on the curriculum, she's exactly right. It's not necessarily a curriculum, it's what the teachers are inserting into the curriculum that's being used and inserting many of these concepts into the everyday assignments. And so that's what we really wanted to address with this bill was, just removing that. But to go into it with that notion that because you're white or because you're Black, you're automatically this, or because you're male, you're automatically an oppressor, or because you're female, you're automatically oppressed is just counterproductive. And I would add, and I said this on the House floor, if this is not being done in your school, that is great, that it's not going to affect anything.
When you talk about, well, it's not in the curriculum, it's not in the course, this is what folks are saying, that's called freedom of speech. And for the folks that are doing that, you have to deal with them on that issue of freedom of speech. I challenge you to go find that teacher that made those comments and challenge their freedom of speech. That's what you need to do. You should not have come up with a ridiculous bill that basically tries to paralyze the proper education of Oklahomans. It is not happening in Oklahoma. You know it's not happening in Oklahoma. Leadership at the House and in the Senate have said it's not happening in Oklahoma. So what you've done is, again, this is a political agenda. This is sweeping across the nation. And we could be talking about real issues about how is the past connected to the present. We're going to continue to have those conversations. We want proper education taught in Oklahoma. And this bill is divisive. This bill is stoking fire. And this bill is going to get a lot of people elected because you've got folks running around scared and terrified, talking about their children being indoctrinated. And it's not being taught in any course or curriculum. You understand that. That's why you did not put the word critical race theory in the bill, because you knew that would create even more of a firestorm.
This has been, no doubt, a robust conversation. I would like to thank both of you for coming and discussing this on Oklahoma News Report and on InDepth. I know you've done it together on the House floor. I think it's important that both sides of this information on this matter get out to Oklahomans. It affects their children. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.